Okay, so we are continuing with the Vedanta Treatise, chapter 20, Supreme Reality. So this section that we're in now is attempting to convey what we've understood to be impossible to convey, but it presents some pointers or some ideas to direct our attention towards the reality. What we finished with last time was this idea of the Trinity. Perishable, imperishable, and supreme being, and which he likened to Son, Holy Ghost, and Father from the Christian theology. So that's where we left off last time. Are there any questions on anything before we pick up with the text? Okay, there's always chat boxes there, and so other microphones, feel free to jump on. Okay, so this was the paragraph that we finished with last time. He says the sages adopted the fundamental principle of education, which means proceeding from the known to the unknown. So in trying to answer the question, what is the reality, or what is God, if you want to sort of take that more devotional type approach to the question, the place that they started was with what we already know. The reality is unknown to us. We don't know what it is. If we want to get to that place of having some comprehension and then ultimately some experience of the reality, we've got to start where we know, which is the world that we experience around us. So the world is changing. It has qualities, it has properties. So the sages says this is God. The world you see around you is God. Okay. He says people then attributed the qualities of the world to God, understood the perishable, changing world to be God. To remove this misconception, they clarified that God is not the gross, perishable world, but the imperishable, changeless substratum which supports it. Okay, so no, God is not the changing thing that you're looking at. It's the stuff that it's made out of. Oh, okay. It's not the changing, perishable world. It's the stuff the world's made out of. But he says that leads to the conclusion that God is confined to the parameters of the world. Hence, they introduced the third concept of God as the supreme being extending beyond the perishable and imperishable. Let me see what okay, so he gives an example in the text next. I've lost my capacity to move with the keys. Okay. So he gives an example in the text next. So we'll just touch on it now and then we'll read through the text. Actually, let's go around the other way. Let's read the text and then explain it. He says the three-word explanation has been carefully introduced by starting from what is best known to you. You perceive the world before you. All your experience is confined therein. You have no idea of Brahman. You are in the position of a weary traveller who sees a mirage in the desert and has no clue of what a desert is. He sees water, not the hot sand beneath. Standing in the midst of a vast desert, he asks what a desert is like. You point out the mirage that he sees and tell him that is it. He misunderstands the desert to be just water. You correct him that the water is just an illusion projected upon the desert. The desert is that which supports the water. The water is a phenomenon that passes away, while the hot sand beneath is the actual desert that stays there. The mirage water is the perishable, while the sand below is the imperishable aspect of the desert. And now he misconstrues the entire desert to be confined to the area of the mirage. You correct him again. You further elucidate that the desert lies as a vast expanse of sand, even beyond the perishable mirage and the imperishable sand beneath it. Desert is all around. So, does Brahman pervade the perishable and imperishable facets of the terrestrial world and beyond into the transcendental. Okay, so this is one of the analogies he uses to try and describe or convey this idea. Using the word God here, again, we can use the word reality. We're trying to figure out what is real. So this is the inquiry. The interesting thing here is that we always take something to be real. We give the stamp of reality to whatever it is that we're contacting. A good example of this is observing the difference between the waking and the dream states. When you're in the dream, you give the dream the stamp of reality. It has that seeming reality to it because you are there. When you wake up out of the dream, you're in the waking state now. Everything about the dream that you remember, you don't give any reality to it now. You dismiss it as not being real. You give a stamp of reality to what is in front of you here now. So we're always claiming something to be real. But what we're talking about here is someone who has done enough analysis already, enough self-inquiry to begin to question what is real. And there's been a recognition that the things I thought were real, if they're real, then why are they not here anymore? If they're real, then why did they change? So there's this questioning of what is real. And the answer is given, first of all, with what is most known to us, the changing, perishable world. So you're a weary traveler in the desert. What the traveler sees in front of them is what seems to be a huge body of water. Now, of course, the person is somewhat confused, tired, fatigued, the brain is dehydrated, and he asks you, what is desert? What will you say? He's standing on the desert, he's walking in the desert. Everything he looks at is the desert. So you say, well, you see what you see in front of you, that's the desert. So he now thinks that that huge body of water, because this is what he sees, is the desert. So desert is that beautiful shimmering body of water over there. No. The desert is the thing that supports it. There's hot sand underneath it. Oh, okay, so desert refers to the hot sand underneath that water. No, it's not just confined to where you see that shimmering. It expands and extends out infinitely in all directions. So two, what is real? What is consciousness? What is myself? Who am I? What am I? You are this. And this is actually the message of the Ishavasya Upanishad that we've been covering on Tuesdays. You are the changing, perishable world. But you're not just that. You are the thing that is becoming other things. But you are also the underlying pure consciousness from which that springs. The unchanging source. When you have a flow of a river, you're standing looking at the flow of the river. What does it imply? The flow of something implies a source of it. What is the source? Where does that river spring from? At what point do we say it's not flowing across this point, it's emerging from this point? What is the source? In a similar sort of a way, you experience yourself as a flow of consciousness. You experience your world, your life as a flow of consciousness. You are that flow of consciousness. That's fairly easy to grasp. Yeah, of course I am this flow of consciousness. That's the whole problem. But you're also the underlying source, which does not change, which is not flowing. The source isn't flowing. The source is a self-existent. So what is the source of all of this becoming? Well, it's pure existence. It's pure being. All things that are changing, they are this, and then they are something else. Is that verb to be again. That is a tree. Cut it down. It is a log. Chop it up. It is planks of wood. Rearrange them. It is a table. Burn it. It is ash. From tree to log to planks to table to ash, it is a constant becoming. But what's not changing? The beingness of it. It exists. Whatever you're looking at, from table to ash or from tree to ash, it is both becoming and being at the same time. But being doesn't just exist wherever you see changing phenomena. The notion of being expands and extends out well beyond whatever phenomena we happen to be regarding. That's the weary traveler. It's not, this hot sand doesn't just underlie the mirage that you see. It extends out infinitely in all directions. What is the reality? Who am I? I am this changing, becoming, this flow of consciousness. I'm also the source, the underlying, unchanging aspect of being. But I'm not just that. Consciousness transcends the phenomena of being and its underlying substratum that I'm currently regarding. So at each stage we adopt an idea, enter into it, feel it, and then go beyond it again. And it's not a dismissing of. I'm not the changing, perishable world. I am the underlying substratum. It's an increase. It's an increasing embrace. I am the changing, perishable world. And I am the unchanging, imperishable substratum. Both. And again, that's the beautiful message of the Upanishad. So one last analogy which is also used to convey this is that of clay. Imagine someone who's lived all their life in the city, never been out of the concrete jungle, and they hear this word, clay. And they ask you, what is clay? And so you take them to a room in their own house. You say, you see all those pots over there? You've got them arranged in that room. That's clay. And so he thinks, oh, so clay refers to those tall vessels. Well, no, that's not what clay is. Here, let me show you. So you take all of those pots and you pulverize them, turn them to fine dust. That's the clay. Here, watch, you add some water and turn them into a single large vase. Pulverize that and turn them into a series of small drinking vessels. You do this a number of times. You see? Oh, so clay is not the vessels. Clay is the stuff they're made out of. Gotcha. So here is the clay. I have the clay. Well, no, you don't have all the clay. There's a lot more clay. So you take him out of his home, out into a rural area, and you show him a vast field of clay soil extending in all directions. So this is clay. It's not just confined to the pots in your home. So what is clay? Is clay the pots? Yes, but it's not confined to the pots. Is clay the stuff that those pots are made out of? Yes, but it's not confined to those pots. Clay is the being, the becoming, and the beyond. The perishable, the imperishable, and Uttama Purusha. So for these ideas, it's not just a matter of understanding them. They're fairly easy to grasp, especially when the analogies are given. Again, these are pointers towards the reality. So it's a matter of sitting with the thought, catching it. Again, that sense of feeling it, and then moving beyond into the next thought. There's a big difference between reading and imbibing content and reflecting, which changes your relationship to the content. Okay, any queries on any of that aspect? Okay, the next section is 3 schools of thought. So this is changing now from describing the reality with a series of pointers as to now our relationship with it. What is the relationship between a human being and this reality, or God, as he talks about it? He says there are 3 schools of thought which explain the relation between a human being and God. They are known as Dvaita, dualism, Advaita, monism, and Vashishta Advaita, qualified monism. The school of dualism states that you are separate from God. You are a finite being, God is infinite, that you can never become one with God. Madhvacharya is the chief exponent of the dualistic theory. The school of monism lays down the absolute oneness of God, that there can be no division or demarcation in the absolute. The finite has no separate status in the infinite. You cannot be separate from God. You are God. That is the philosophy enunciated by Adi Shankaracharya. The school of qualified monism considers you as an aspect of God. God is whole and you are a part of the whole. You will remain a part and can never merge with God. Ramanujacharya propounded this theory. The 3 schools seem to be contrasting, contradicting one another. Ironically, all 3 exponents have derived their philosophies from the same textbooks of Vedanta. Each tries to prove his point using the authority of these ancient texts. There is no use relying on authorities. You must make use of the views of these great masters and arrive at your own conclusions. Okay, so 3 schools of thought. What is the relationship between myself as I experience myself and this reality that we've been talking about? God is the word he's using here. Reality is what we've been using throughout. Consciousness, self with a capital S. In fact, all of these absolute terms have capitals. Either there is a dualism, there's myself and the reality, and we are inherently separate, or there is monism. There is absolutely no separateness between me and the reality. The reality is me. Or there's a qualified monism which says that I'm a part of that reality. I can never merge with it because I'm a part of it. So he says here, it is interesting to study Hanuman's view on the relation between human and God. Hanuman is acclaimed as the greatest devotee, Bhakta, of Lord Rama. His life symbolized the ultimate in devotion to God. He gave the impression that the immortal God was far removed from his mortal self, that a human is separate from God. And yet when asked how he was related to God, he answered thus. Okay, so Hanuman is one of the gods in the Hindu mythology. He's a great devotee of Lord Rama. So Lord Rama is, again, another one of the characters there. And to be a devotee of something implies separateness. A person is devoted to their family, or to their work, or to their physical health, or to their spiritual growth. the moment you say devoted to, you imply two aspects. One is the devotee, and one is the recipient of that devotion. There's an inherent sense of separation. So when he calls himself a great devotee, there must be this impression of separateness. So if he's a great devotee of God, there's a sense of separateness. He says, and yet, that being the case, when asked how he was related to God, he answered, Deha bhavena dasosmi, jiva bhavena tvadam shakaha, atma bhavena tvamevaham. Translated, so it's the Sanskrit, not the word, not the best pronunciation, but nonetheless, when I consider my body, I am your servant. When I consider my mind, I am part of you. But when I consider myself, you and I are one. Even the proverbial Bhakta has declared that he and God are one. On attaining spiritual enlightenment, you become one with the Supreme Reality, you merge with God. So what he's saying here is that the three schools of thought are looking at something from different perspectives. There's a perspective from which the reality and the expression are separate. So, for example, from the perspective of physicality, the physical body is constantly changing. It's, the physical body can't contact emotions. You can't see a person's anger. You can't smell a person's compassion. The physical body can't contact that. Even emotions, the subtle body, it can't. What to speak of the subtler aspects of reality. So there's an inherent sense of separateness. It's a little bit like what we were talking about earlier. The flow of the river is not the source. They're inherently separate. The flow and the source are separate. The flow moves away from the source, even the minutest distance from that source. It's not there. When I consider the flow and the source, they are separate. He says, when I consider my mind, I'm part of you. So the sense of oneness, the feeling of oneness, or the word, of course, that we often use here is love, allows you to embrace another aspect of the world within yourself. Again, think about the relationships that you have, partners, children, friends, siblings. I love that person. Well, what does that mean? It means that I consider us as a single unit. At the same time as recognizing my own individual self, I also feel that we are a single unit. We use the phrase family unit. 4 individuals, but at the same time, a single unit. So in a sense, we are part of each other. Now, how is that achieved? It's done through that feeling of oneness. The subtle body or the mind. In a similar way, the flow of the river and the source are connected. They're part of the same phenomenon. Okay, that particular portion that you're staring at 100 kilometers down from the source, it is not the source. But in the same breath, you can immediately understand how that portion and the source are connected as part of the same phenomenon. So the mind is subtler. It has this ability to embrace and be part of. He says, when you take a third perspective and I consider that aspect of myself which is not changing, which is not perishable, then I am the reality. That flow, that piece of the river that you're looking at, and the source, they're both water. The becoming and the being are both consciousness. The flow and the source are both water. They're not different. So those first two examples, body showing inherent separateness, mind showing being part of, these we can understand. This third aspect is much more difficult. It's much subtler. When we consider our self, capital S, there is no difference. It's the same phenomenon, same experience, same substratum. It is oneness. So the question is, where do we identify? Which aspect of myself do I give the stamp of reality? And so this starts to describe or define our spiritual growth. As we advance in our spiritual understanding, we continue to embrace subtler aspects of our being. So you can imagine someone who is very gross, hasn't really even stepped onto a spiritual path. They define and describe themselves in terms of their physicality. What are some of your greatest strengths? What are some of your greatest weaknesses? Oh, my jawline. Beautiful. And, I've got good strong bones. I look really good. Weaknesses are, my calves need a bit of work. Got to do leg day. But they're answering this question in terms of their physicality. What do you change about yourself? I wish I was a couple of inches taller. And of course, that's how they view the world. If you change anything about your appearance, your partner, what would you change? Oh, I wish my spouse was a little bit shorter so that we had a nicer, etc. They view the world through the physical lens because that's the part of them that seems most real. What do they pursue? Things that derive from their sense of physicality, things that cater to their physical demands. As they grow spiritually, their feelings and emotions become more real to them, more of a defining feature of who and what they are. They see that in others, they relate to others in that way. They pursue things that are derived from that and serve that. Further again, it's values and ideas, morality, and then finally, the sense of identity that goes beyond the physical, emotional, and intellectual components. So it's not a discarding of those other components. We're not suppressing, we're not cutting things off from ourselves. It's getting bigger. It's containing more, holding more, embracing more. Yeah, I am the physical body, and I am my emotions, and I am my values, and I am my morality, and I am myself. So that's really one of the things that this section is prompting us to ask. Where is my focus of attention? What aspects of the world am I pursuing? Are they mostly material, physical, emotional, intellectual, moral, or spiritual? The problem that can come here is that when we recognize or when we accept that pursuing the subtler elements is what I should be doing, in inverted commas, or in scare quotes, that we again begin to suppress the other elements, that we don't allow our material nature to fully express itself. We stop ourselves from being who we are. It's not a matter of stopping things, it's a matter of adding attention to the subtler elements. And then if things fall away, they fall away. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't practice intelligent self-regulation, but we're not forcing anything. We're not trying to be something we're not. We put the effort in and the becoming happens. So this whole text, all the way through, is designed to get us to shift our attention to the subtler elements of our personality. Different schools of philosophy, different versions of truth, different knowledges of God, have all turned into stone walls obstructing the vision of the reality. Ironically, they are meant to aid your vision. Hence, you must carefully reflect upon, understand the truths embedded in them, convert the opaque stones into transparent lenses to gain the vision of reality, attain spiritual enlightenment. So this is true of all spiritual or religious philosophies, is that they can act either as lenses, which magnify and clarify the truth, or they can act as opaque stones that obscure it. They begin to obscure it when we relate wrongly to the material. To relate wrongly to it means that we don't properly digest it, and what happens is that we get attached to ideas because they serve some purpose of the ego. You can make up any kind of random example. Let's say that you learn through your life that ultimately we are alone. We've been shunned and rejected and neglected, and you learn you can't trust anybody. Ultimately, the only person you've got is yourself. We're absolutely alone in this world. So what happens? You look at this school of thought. It says, we can never become one with God. You're inherently separate from God. Yeah, that sounds about right. What's happened? The ego has this view of separateness, which has some truth to it. My body is not your body. You are a vegetarian, I am a meat eater. You're tall, I'm short. Yeah, they are separate. You stay out in the sun, I don't get sunburned. So there is some truth to it, but that's not the full truth. But what's happening? I'm taking an idea and the ego is appropriating it to strengthen itself, to strengthen its current position. And so, we talked about this in one of our other classes, this idea of spiritual bypassing, which is when we take a philosophical or a spiritual concept or practice and we use it to preserve and protect an egocentric position, and we use it to avoid dealing with some of the uncomfortable truths that lie within the personality. So we take our person who recognizes that we're all separate and you can't trust anybody. It's difficult for them to open up into trust. It's scary. It's terrifying. The idea of becoming vulnerable and making yourself open to being hurt again. That's a very terrifying, that's a very scary thing to do. So I'm not going to do it. And how do I justify that? The texts say that we're all inherently separate. So I keep myself separate physically, emotionally, intellectually. I don't deal with these aspects because they're challenging. As a consequence, I keep myself in that limited state, holding on to a limited piece of the truth, rather than, yes, this is true, but we are also connected. Even physically, my body's made up of what used to be other human bodies. They lived, they walked on this earth, they died, they melted into the ground. Their remains were consumed by plants and animals, and those melted into the ground. They were consumed by plants, and I have eaten those plants. And I have become, my body has become what used to be other bodies. It's just a constant recycling of matter. There's only one field of matter, there's just different bits molded out of the clay. Emotionally, we're connected. Intellectually, I don't accept that. I don't go there. So the knowledge has become an opaque stone, keeping me from seeing the truth. So we've got to be careful with how we relate to these ideas, because we cherry pick. We pick and choose those aspects that we like because they defend our existing ego position. We ignore those that challenge it. So one of the aspects which I also want to touch on, he says there's no use relying on authorities. So this is one of the key messages of this text. Now, of course, interestingly enough, this text is putting itself forward as an authority. Otherwise, he wouldn't have published it. But there's a difference between taking the support, the advice of an authority, and relying on it. To rely on authority means that you outsource your curiosity, you outsource your thinking or your investigation to someone else. It's that independent spirit of inquiry that is the effort. It's not the information that you accumulate. Now, of course, that's useful because that becomes tools and practices and material for reflection. But what does the work is that independent spirit of curiosity. I don't know, and I have to figure out for myself. And again, especially in the field of spirituality, it's very easy to fail in that obligation, to fall into that sense of, well, it's written here, it was said by this person, it must be true. Arrive at your own conclusions. Okay, that's in chapter 20. Chapter 21 is the final chapter in the text. Any questions on anything before we begin this chapter? Okay, the chapter is entitled That Thou Art. So this phrase is taken from one of the Upanishads. It's one of the phrases that comprises what's known as the 4 aphorisms, okay, which he talks about now. Let's get straight into that. He says, the Vedas have been distinguished as the foremost spiritual text from time immemorial. They contain the perennial philosophy of Vedanta, which has been indoctrinated in ancient India through 4 aphorisms known as Mahavakyas. Mahavakyas literally means great statements, supreme declarations. They appear one in each of the 4 Vedas as follows. Prajnanam Brahma, Brahman is consciousness. Tat tvam asi, that thou art. Ayam Atma Brahma, this self is Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. So again, this word Brahman here is being used to describe, or to indicate rather, the reality, the truth. So these four statements are given in a specific order, which carries a flow of thought. He talks about that in the next paragraph. So Brahman is consciousness. This is a declaration. What is the reality? The reality is nothing other than consciousness. You are that consciousness. This is the second statement, that thou art. Who am I? What am I? You are that consciousness. Third statement is a statement of practice. Okay, well, if I am that consciousness, why do I not realize it? How do I get there? How do I come to realize that I am that consciousness? He says, practice this. Practice this self is Brahman. It's not just a mechanical repetition. It's a reconnection with the truth of what you know about yourself. This self is the reality. When we are going about our daily business, we lose sight of ourself. You're always acting, speaking to people, doing stuff. You're always feeling different things, flustered and frustrated, or peaceful and happy, thinking about different things, figuring stuff out. But what we lose sight of is the sense of self, which is the container for all of the qualities and properties that you possess, for all the actions that you perform, for all of the experiences, for all the phenomena that you're going through. There's a sense of yourself as the first person subject of the story. In a quiet moment, you can sit, you can reflect, and you can find it. One of the key ways that we've talked about this is that reflection on the distinction between the waking and dream states. Consider the dream you had last night. Who was the one going through those experiences? I am. I was the one. I went through them. Who's the one going through the current experiences in the waking state? I am. What is present here in the waking state that was also present there in the dream state? Okay, not the body that you had that disappeared, not the world around you, not the thoughts and the feelings that you had, they disappeared. But there's something, that sense of being the one, that sense of your own self. That is the thing that we lose. We get caught up, involved in the expressions of action, perception, emotion, and thought. As a practice, he says, this self is Brahman. That's the practice. Return back to that sense of I am. Reconnect with it. As we do that, we withdraw our identification with the material layers and move closer to enlightenment, which is described in the final aphorism, I am Brahman. That's a declaration of the experience of it. So let's go through these. Now, any questions before we react? It's really a re-explanation. He says the first aphorism, Prajnanam Brahma, Brahman is consciousness, appears in the Aitareya Upanishad in the Rig Veda. This aphorism makes a general declaration that Brahman, the supreme reality, is consciousness. The one homogeneous consciousness that pervades everywhere, that which functions in the macrocosm and microcosm, the common substratum of the world and the individual. If the consciousness pervading the world is likened to total space, then the consciousness in an individual would be the space in a pot. But the space in a pot cannot be segregated from total space. The material of the pot cannot divide space. Space may be referred to as pot space, room space, open space, etc., all these spaces are one and the same. Space as such is homogeneous, indivisible, called differently for convenient reference. Likewise, consciousness is referred to differently, depending on its heterogeneous embodiments, though it remains ever homogeneous. The first aphorism pronounces its homogeneity. It is known as Lakshanavakya, which means a statement of definition. So there's another analogy here. When you look around your room, look around your home, you've got a cup in front of you. You've got cup space. Consider your bathroom. You have bathroom space. Consider the closet space. Now the spaces are all different, defined by the walls or the vessels around them. So it makes sense, where do I put the towels? I would put them in the cupboard space. You need to have this understanding to function. But you also know that even though we refer to these different spaces as having an independent existence, each one, they don't. When you demolish your home, you haven't liberated the bathroom space or the closet space. The space was never actually constrained. It was just called that. The space is ever indivisible. The space in the closet is the same thing as the space in the bathroom, in the cup. So this is what he means by Brahman is consciousness. You have your friend, that's a person, that's a conscious being. You have your pet, you have your spouse, you have your children, your parents, you have your siblings. These are all different consciousnesses, labeled differently because of their different contours, their different shapes. But truth is that they are not separated. There's an indivisible consciousness. The truth is that consciousness. So this is the statement of, this is a declaration of the truth. This is the second aphorism, Tattvamasi, that thou art, appears in Chandogya Upanishad in the Samaveda. Declares you are pure consciousness. Tat, that, refers to the consciousness, the supreme reality, Brahman. Tvam, thou, to the innermost self, Atman, the core of your personality. Asi, art, establishes the oneness of all pervading consciousness and yourself. Brahman and Atman are one and the same. The consciousness is like the ocean, an individual like a wave. The water in the wave and the ocean is the same. Beings would be waves with distinct individualities. The consciousness in every being is the same all-pervading consciousness. Yourself is the infinite reality, that thou art. This aphorism is in the form of an advice to a spiritual seeker, hence it is known as Upadesha Vakya, statement of advice. So you can think of it perhaps as the answer to a question. You've talked about this consciousness. What's its relationship to me? You are that consciousness. And he goes, one of the analogies that we've worked with a lot, that of the ocean and the waves. So it's like speaking to a wave and saying to the wave, you are seawater, you are the ocean. What's the reality? The reality is seawater. Who are you speaking to? You're speaking to a wave. You've gone surfing and the wave is speaking to you. Maybe don't drink so much seawater next time, but nonetheless, you're going through this experience. The wave is speaking to you. What's real? Seawater is real. Who am I? You are that. You are the seawater. The reality of the underlying ocean is the reality of the individual wave. Yes, now that wave has its own distinct individuality for that moment. Its own shape, size, movement. It appears for a while and then crashes down again, but its intrinsic reality is the seawater. You are that. So this is the state that the guru is in. Sees an individual wave asking, who am I, what am I? You're that consciousness that we were just talking about. Third aphorism, how do I get there? Third aphorism, Ayam Atma Brahma, this self is Brahman, as in Mandukya Upanishad in the Atharvana Veda. Ayam means this, Atma is your supreme self within. The aphorism states that the Atman, self in you, is Brahman pervading everywhere. If Brahman is likened to a conflagration, then an individual would be a spark arising from it. Conflagration is fire, so is spark. Both are the element fire. Spark is conflagration. So are you the supreme consciousness, yourself. Atman is Brahman. Remember this truth at all times. Repeat it to yourself. Entertain this thought until you realize yourself to be Brahman. Hence, this aphorism is known as a Parthasarathy statement of practice. One of the things he's talked about with regards to this is synchronization. So it's difficult to remember this truth at all times. Okay, great if you can, but difficult. So he says there will be activities throughout your day that you regularly perform. Every day you do them. You brush your teeth, or you go to work and you climb the steps to get to your workplace. There are activities that are always being done. You get on YouTube and what happens? There's always an advert at the beginning. So what do? You patiently sit and wait for the advert to finish. There are things that are always happening in your life. When they happen, synchronize them with this idea. So as you're walking up the steps, as you are brushing your teeth, as you are muting the advert, which has got another 30 seconds to go, every time that activity begins, associate it, synchronize it with this reconnection. This self is reality. This self is Brahman. So this practice is based upon prior reflection, an understanding of what these terms mean, and a practice at reflecting on them. So the practice, like anything, grows and changes over time. Anytime you practice something, of course, you begin to do it better, you can become more proficient, and the way that you do it changes. So like anything, it's important not to get stuck in this practice. But this is a good way to start it. Synchronize it with specific activities. And then let it bleed into more and more activities. Entertain this truth at all times. The last aphorism, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, appears in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in Yajur Veda. Aham means I, Asmi means am, and Brahman is God. So the aphorism means I am God. It is the ultimate pronouncement of a self-realized person. Prior to self-realization, you use the first person singular pronoun I to mean the waker, dreamer, or deep sleeper. In the three states, yourself is conditioned by your gross, subtle, and causal bodies, respectively. Okay, just pause here. So that's chapters 10 and 11, if you want to review that idea. He says, and the conditioned self expresses as the waker, dreamer, and deep sleeper. The philosophy of Vedanta helps you to get over the conditioning, apply this knowledge in your life, transcend the limitation imposed by your material bodies. Expose your supreme self, reveal the nascent I. That pure, unconditioned native I is God. My real self is God. That is the ultimate experience of a self-realization, hence known as Anubhava-vakya, statement of experience. So this fourth statement is not necessarily something that a person says any more than you as a human. You don't walk around saying, I am human, I am human. Or if you're a woman, you don't walk around pronouncing to yourself or others, I am a woman, I am a woman. You are it. You know it. Everything you do speaks it. But nonetheless, it's put in language just to complete the statements. So that's the culmination of the practice. So these four statements, and this is really a full description of the whole philosophy of Vedanta. The reality is consciousness. You are that consciousness. You can practice it thus and achieve this. Now, of course, there's a lot more to it than just that. That's putting it in a nutshell. Everything else around it supports this flow of attention. Okay. Any queries or comments before we finish off? Okay, so I'm thinking maybe we just finish off these last couple of paragraphs so we can start afresh at the beginning of next time. He says the Bhagavad Gita expounds the aphorism that thou art. Its 18 chapters can be divided into 3 sets of 6 chapters each. The first one relates to thou, the middle set deals with that, the last set with art. So the profound philosophy of the Gita expounds the aphorism, such as the power and grandeur of the aphorism. So yeah, it's another way to look at the Bhagavad Gita. There's 18 chapters in the Gita, can be broken up to 3 sets of 6. The first 6 have a theme, so do the second 6, and so do the final 6. That theme can be thou that art. The aphorisms pronounce that there is but one supreme reality, that reality you are. Realize that. The world is a mere passing phenomenon, a variety show with no pith or substance. Yet you are lost in this empty show. The ignorance of yourself has caused it all. No more of that ignorance. Regain the knowledge of your supreme self. Establish yourself in your real being. Merge with the reality. So he's saying here, make knowing who you are your priority. You already have priorities in life. We all do. Every one of us has a priority. He says, put at the top, gaining a sense of identity that is rock solid, that cannot be moved, that is actually real. The implication is that the person that you think you are now, the reality of yourself, is temporary. And when the environment or the circumstances change around you, that identity will no longer be enough to manage your well-being. And that's when we face challenges. Our sense of who and what we are meets with a changing world, and it doesn't fit anymore. A child becomes a teenager and goes through all sorts of challenges. A teenager becomes an adult, similarly goes through challenges. Why? My view of the world, which is who I am, my mindset, my worldview, no longer has the sophistication to manage my world effectively. Things were so much simpler when I was just 13. Now I'm 20, I've got all these choices to make. So what do? I change my worldview. I update and upgrade my sense of self and come back into a sense of balance with my world now. The challenges are removed. And of course, there's a new set. Now I've got a long-term relationship to manage. And now a family. And now I've got to, etc. The world's consistently doing this. He says, get established in an identity that is unshifting. Really know who you are. Make that your priority. That reality you are. So there's some faith in there, because he's making a statement, but we don't know to be true yet. So there's got to be some faith that maybe I am the underlying consciousness. Let me see if that is true. Let me find it out for myself. Who am I? Okay. So we continue next week with your original being. We're back tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific for Q&A if anyone has questions. We've got one that's come through on email. We'll take that one up. If you have a question, feel free to email it through or just join in and ask or listen. So for those joining, I'll see you next time. And for those not, have a great week and I'll see you again.
Thank you, Glenn.
Adios.
Thank you.